Hello friends, new and old, readers, writers, whoever else has hopped aboard this YouTube ship of mine, welcome. 2 weeks ago, or 3 in future me time, I published a new book, On a Dark Tide, a new mystery novel. This is the third novel that I've published, but the first time that I have done it myself. If you want to know why I decided to self-publish this book rather than go through a traditional publisher like I did with my first 2 books, then check out the video I posted a few weeks ago where I go into more details about that decision. Today, though, I want to talk about my experiences releasing a book with the traditional publisher versus releasing a book on my own. I'm going to try and focus here on the marketing and publicity side of things rather than the entire process. The getting it out to readers part rather than making the book part. Crooked River was my debut novel. It launched 100 years ago in 2014, pandemic time. It came out with an imprint of HarperCollins in hardcover and ebook first. About 8 months later, it came out in paperback. My second novel, Everything We Lost, was released in 2017. It came out first in paperback and ebook and audiobook. We skipped the hardcover part entirely, which I actually prefer. As a reader, I like the price point and the feel of a paperback better than a hardcover, so I had no real issue with the release of my second book being in paperback first. My third novel, On a Dark Tide, the newest one, came out at the end of April 2021, in case you're watching this a long time from now. I released it as a paper book, an ebook, and an audiobook. So there was quite a bit of time between each book release, about 3 years between each of them. Not a huge amount, not like Donna Tartt time, but I'm not writing Donna Tartt kind of books, and the 3 years between book releases is a long time. It's hard to build momentum with readers that way. It's hard to build off the last book because in 3 years' time, people will have forgotten about you, have moved on to other books. And so when it came time to release On a Dark Tide, it was almost like I was starting over from scratch. Not quite, but almost. For the purpose of comparing how it feels to release a book with and then without a publisher, I think this is kind of a good opportunity to do that. Now again, let me remind you, this is my own personal experience. Every writer is going to have a different experience, whether they publish traditionally or whether they self-publish. This is my story. It's not how it's going to go every time for every author. Neither of the books that were published traditionally were picked as lead titles for the imprint. Being a lead title changes everything. It's pretty much the only way you can guarantee the kind of media and sales intention and money you need to break out that book. So I was a pretty small fish in a very big pond with this imprint, and I was very keenly aware of it at the time. I had no idea what I was doing and only a vague idea of what a publisher might be doing behind the scenes based on like blogs and talking with other writing friends. Now there might be something to the old adage that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, because I'm a very quiet wheel most of the time. And when my debut novel came out, I just kind of sat back and said, let's see what this is like. Let's see what happens. Let's go with the flow and just see what happens. I didn't ask a lot of questions. I didn't express concern when there were things I was concerned about, but I didn't want to bother anybody. I didn't want to be in the way, but then I was anxious because I had no idea what was going on or what was happening with the book. I had no idea when or why things were happening or when I could expect things to happen. I still don't really have a very good idea of how traditional publishing works behind the scenes or how it worked in my case. I just know that looking back, I feel like I didn't have much say in any of it. So here's the first big difference in my experience between a traditional book release and a self-published book release. When it came to On a Dark Tide, I decided everything. I decided the day I was going to publish, and I didn't have to wait in a queue of other authors. I could basically pick any day I wanted. And I picked a day that was a few months after the book was edited and finished and ready to go, rather than a year and a half, which is kind of a traditional publishing cycle. You sell it, you edit it, 18 months later it's out on bookstore shelves. It's a long time between the sale and the publishing date, and part of that reason is to get the book ready, but part of the reason is because when you're working with a traditional imprint, they also have a bunch of other books coming out, and there's just a publishing schedule, and you're put in line there and then kind of move through the whole process as you move closer to publication date. It's nice to be able to pick a publication date that shortened that time period between when the book was edited and when it was published. I also knew exactly how many people were going to be getting early copies of the book and who those people were, because I was the person who contacted those people and sent them the book. I knew what my cover was going to look like from day one because I'm the one who designed it. I knew what to expect because I was setting the expectations. So even though there was some anxiety around release day, it was a different kind of anxiety. It had everything to do with, did I do this right? Did I follow all the steps? Is this going to be a disaster? Or am I going to be disappointing this large group of people who have all been working to try and make my book successful? Am I going to be a success or a failure based on a series of unknowns and things completely out of my control? So it was a slightly different kind of anxiety when I released my first 2 books versus my 3rd book. There were some similarities. Is this going to be a disaster? All 3 times I asked that question. The success of a traditionally published book shouldn't rest solely on the author's shoulders. It's not supposed to. The publisher is supposed to take on some of that burden as they're the ones stepping in to handle the marketing and distribution and reader outreach, etc. But there's something broken in traditional publishing. Even though a publisher is supposed to be responsible for getting the book out to readers, that's literally their job, to find an audience for your book. A lot of the weight and those tasks have now fallen onto the author's shoulders, has become the author's burden, especially in recent years and especially with large publishing companies. And if your book underperforms, at least for me, the experience I had was this feeling of profound disappointment. Like it was my fault, I didn't write the right kind of book, I didn't write a book that readers wanted to read, or maybe I was just a bad writer, full stop. I'm still kind of unpacking a lot of the emotional baggage from those book releases, to be honest. But I think what I want to say here is that when you're releasing a self-published book, the only person who's really going to be disappointed if it doesn't go the way you want it to is you. And maybe your parents who paid for college and are wondering what the hell you're doing with your life. The pressure is there still, certainly. Of course it is. You want to sell books, you want to be successful. For me, it's a different kind of pressure now. With self-publishing, I'm leaving behind the bestseller or bust mindset and putting my hopes in a slow growth model. The more sustainable idea of building a readership over many books and over a long period of time rather than just one book breaking out. So the pressure really is to write the next book and to keep writing new books. Okay, so the first big difference for me between traditional release day and self-published release day is that with the self-published release day, you have control over what's happening and you know exactly what's coming down the pipeline next. This control includes pricing. I decide which formats to publish in and I decide which prices to set. There's more flexibility for me this way, more opportunities to take advantage of promotions and changes in the marketplace and to reach a wider readership. Traditional publishers are a little like barges and I'm over here this little dinghy. I can change direction with a single twitch of an oar, but for a traditional publisher to do that, it takes quite a bit more effort. Traditional publishers aren't always as willing to experiment either. But as an indie author, there's a lot of experimentation and a lot of things you can try that you wouldn't be able to do as an author working with a traditional publisher or with their marketing team. So having control over all of that is a plus. It's a very positive aspect to self-publishing. It's a strength. Now, the second big difference I saw between releasing a book through a traditional publisher versus releasing a book myself is one that I think is more on the negative side. It is a weakness for the self-published author, and that is the problem of visibility. Traditional publishers have a lot of systems in place already to help sell books. They've been doing it for years. Decades, generations. They have connections, they know people, they know bookstores, bookstore owners, they know book buyers, they know librarians, they have Rolodexes full of people's names and phone numbers. Do people still use Rolodexes? They have catalogs and resources and sales conferences, and every season they use this entire tool belt of theirs to tell bookstores, libraries, foreign publishers, an average reader like you and me about which books are coming out and which books they're excited about. And yes, they give preferential treatment to their lead titles, but they still do a service for every author that they publish. Both of my books were put into sales catalogs that the publisher sent out to bookstores and libraries. It was pitched at conferences. Crooked River was picked as an indie next book. Basically, the sales team pitched it to the right bookstores who read it and loved it, and all those booksellers showed it so much love. Thank you, booksellers. The right people, the people who buy and sell books, were told about both of my books, and I sold thousands of copies of each of these. I would not have been able to do that myself. I have not been able to repeat that success with On a Dark Tide yet. Now again, let me repeat, this system is not equal. Some books get a lot of attention, some publishers do more for their authors, some publishers do less. But even with this kind of inequality, every publisher has at least a small amount set aside for each book that they're publishing. They give resources to each book that they publish, even if it's just, handing out a couple hundred ARCs to bookstores or early readers, or setting up a Goodreads giveaway, or using NetGalley to get early reviews. All of those things are very helpful for getting visibility and selling a book. They have resources that self-publishers often don't have, especially early on, right out of the gate. Now later on, as the readership grows, self-publishers have more resources and, by extension, more visibility. But if you're just starting out, or if you're starting over, or if you're stuck in a rut, Visibility is always going to be a challenge. Finding readers is always hard. It's hard to catch people's attention. For fiction writers, this feels especially true because there's a lot of competition of content out there, and people just don't read as much as they used to. I mean, I know that in our little book sphere, we're all reading all the time, but the average person reads a couple, maybe 10 books a year. That's not a lot. But there are a lot of readers out there, a lot of people who read a lot of books, and I think that there's plenty of space in the market for people to write new books and sell new books. Traditional publishers can help some with this visibility because they have the platform and the money and the connections and the Rolodexes and the experience to reach out and get these books into the right people's hands, hopefully. Because the thing is, they don't always reach the right markets. Just because a traditional publisher is publishing your book, it doesn't necessarily mean they are reaching your readers. That's something that's similar whether you're traditionally published or self-published. You have to make choices for a book. How to write it, how to design it, what kind of cover to put on it, how to market it, which readers to try and sell it to. A traditional publisher isn't always going to make the right choices. Neither is someone who's self-publishing their book. But I think when you self-publish, because it's you, again, you have that flexibility. Going back to that idea of flexibility, you have more chances to pivot, to try new covers, to throw something out if you think it isn't working and try something completely new. Your books are never lost causes. With traditional publishing, that kind of long tail marketing doesn't often happen. Sometimes it does. Most of the time for mid-list authors or authors trying to grow their readership, a book has one chance to break out. And if it doesn't, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle and it becomes harder to get a contract for your next book, your advance drops, etc. Okay, so now that I've experienced both a release with a traditional publisher and a release by myself, is there one that I like better than the other? Look, I think they both have pros and cons, and I know that's a non-answer. So far, I'm finding that I'm enjoying the release of On a Dark Tide better than my other releases. I'm not feeling as tossed about by emotions or whatever the way I did with the first two books, and some of this is just, personal growth. I'm a little bit older, a little bit wiser, and so maybe how I'm feeling about this release has less to do with me self-publishing and more to do with the work I've done over the years for my mental health, or just feeling more confident about myself in general. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that while I prefer the illusion of control I have over releasing my own book, and I prefer setting up my own expectations and meeting them, and I like that I don't have to ask for permission, it is difficult to release a book on your own, or mostly on your own. I'm not completely alone here. Releasing a book by myself has been difficult. Doing all the stuff a publisher would normally do takes time, mental, and emotional energy away from writing. Often the results I get are a drop in the bucket compared to what a publisher could do. Sometimes it feels like I threw myself out of a very large pond and straight into the ocean when I decided to self-publish. So I know you want an easy answer, but I don't have one. If you've written a book and you're trying to decide whether you want to work with a traditional publisher or self-publish the book, this is not the video where I tell you which one to do. Both paths, traditional and indie, are long and winding and fraught with obstacles and filled with joyful moments. I think probably the best thing to do if you're trying to decide whether to self-publish or sign a contract with a traditional publisher is to define your goals, gather as much knowledge and information as you can about both paths, and then make the best decision that you can with the book that you have. This seems like a good place to end, doesn't it? A positive place. With me telling you to keep writing, friends. Keep going, keep experimenting, keep sharing your stories. Come back next Tuesday. I'm going to be talking about all the lessons I learned self-publishing my first book, plus what I am planning to do differently for the next book. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.